So when you're talking about variables in an experiment, there's four main categories we'll talk about in this class. There's the independent variable, the dependent variable, constant variables, and extraneous variables. Our experiments are always going to contain only one independent variable. That is the variable that you're going to manipulate or change during the experiment. So using the example from our research question tutorial, talking about looking at the impact of Red Bull on exercise, the amount of Red Bull that you give each participant would be the independent variable because you're going to change the amount of Red Bull that you give them. The idea would be that it can impact your experiment because the more Red Bull you ingest, the more energy you have to carry out your workout. You're going to always want to include the range and units. Students typically want to do independent variables that are types. So they may say, well, let's look at different types of caffeinated beverages or types of pre-workout stimulants. For this class, we want to avoid independent variables that involve the type. We want to use independent variables that involve the amount. So in this case, we're saying that we're going to give participants between 0 fluid ounces of Red Bull and 12 fluid ounces of Red Bull, and that those are going to be pre-measured by the investigator before the experiment begins. So that's the independent variable. It's quantitative, meaning that it's an amount, not qualitative, which would be a type. It is measurable with a range in units, and it's what you're going to be focused on prior to the experiment, controlling in the best way possible. The second type of variable is called a dependent variable. This is what you're going to measure in your experiment. So in this case, keeping with the Red Bull idea, we're going to measure how far they run on a treadmill. So if they ingest different amounts of Red Bull and we give them the same amount of time on the treadmill, if they drink more Red Bull, will they run farther? So you're going to measure the distance on the treadmill. A change in distance shows a change in their energy during the workout. You're going to say it'll be in a range of 0 to 4 miles, and the distance will be measured by the treadmill itself. Constants are things that you're going to hold the same. You're going to keep them the same the entire time. So one thing that would be an example of a constant would be the time on the treadmill. If you allow different test subjects to run for different lengths of time, then their data is going to be skewed. So we're going to say, let's keep time consistent. So they're always going to run for 30 minutes on the treadmill. And how are we going to control that? We're going to use the timer on the treadmill to determine when they've run for 30 minutes. The last category of variables in an experiment for this course are called extraneous variables, and you'll see that it has the word extra here. Those are extra things that might skew your results or mess up your experiment. So we're going to talk about those ahead of time before we begin the experiment. Fitness level of the individual being experimented on is going to play a role in their results. So one way to determine fitness level is to gather a resting heart rate for each individual. Different people will run at different speeds based on their fitness level. And most humans are going to range from a resting heart rate of 40 beats per minute to 90 beats per minute. And so we're going to talk about how we control this. We're going to say that we have to compare our results from one individual to their baseline data that we gathered prior to the experiment. You can't compare person A to person B because they have different fitness levels. So this is an example of the types of variables that you'll see in an experiment for this course. There's more on my lecture notes online.